This is Arsycast. Our special guest today is Kira Kull.
Kira Kull, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you're here because we recently reconnected after many years, but
Yes.
I'm excited to have it sort of archive our catch up again. And so thanks for coming and for making the time out of your whirlwind of a schedule.
It's my pleasure.
So, as you know, I start this out the same way every time, which is to ask, what is your favorite color?
Well, this is a largely debated question in my mind.
Hmm.
It does vary day to day. I'm more delighted by color combinations. Particularly turquoise and orange are my favorite. If I had to pick one, though, it would be turquoise.
Yes. Turquoise and orange.
Yeah.
Is always complementary colors? Because those are pretty...
Not always, but often.
Right.
Like, I mean, certainly green and orange.
That's almost kind of like what I've got
as
going
well.
on in there.
Yeah, it's kind of the, like, sunset with the sea
Yeah.
thing.
Interesting.
Sometimes, yeah, different variations of like pink and green, pink and turquoise. I don't know. I've gotten really into bright colors in the last year and a half or so.
Yes. Brighter than usual? Or brighter than previously?
Brighter than previously.
Hmm.
Yeah. And orange especially. I used to dislike orange a lot. I used to not at all be into it.
Yeah.
And now I think it's so fun.
Well, that's a good segue into, I want to get right into that. Because you brought this bag, which you wear all the time and use all the time, but
Do a little.
could not resist. Like, tell us everything about the bag, because that's rather orange.
It is
and not
rather
only is it orange,
orange.
but it is textured,
It's
furry orange.
very fuzzy. You can pet it if you want. Yeah.
Yeah.
I sometimes call it my little friend, my little, bring to class, bring to work pet.
Well, it's kind of like the creatures book in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
I'll say it's like, hey, and Arthur the dog loves that.
Yeah, see, the pets get along. That's good. But no, this is a beautiful bag designed by my friend, Jose Alegria. And so it says Alegria on it. This is like the brand's staple bag, but this was the first one ever made. So I feel very lucky.
Amazing. Are they each unique, or are they all similarly furry and with the print on it?
Very different styles, different textures. He does a lot with faux leather and like various metal studs and like sparkly materials. And then the furry orange is like the iconic Alegria's art bag.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is Jose Alegria? Are they an artist? Are they a designer? Or are they sort of primarily just, how do you know them?
All of the above.
Wow.
I know him through mutual friends. He's based in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And in the pandemic, he started making beautiful cloth masks. So that was when he really like started expanding more into design and fashion. And he has these beautiful figurines that are like religious iconography that he then repaints to be sort of modern saints partying and things like that. So lots of bright colors, and now he's making beautiful jewelry as well and all sorts of things. So
wow.
It's just like a way to be expressive and have fun. And during the pandemic, having an exciting mask was a big moment.
Yes. And so that was that similarly in the last couple of years of you branching out into the color patterns and bright world that permeates in your world during the pandemic as well.
Definitely. Because suddenly I was at home all the time, as I think most of us were. And I was looking around my apartment with its white blank walls and just realizing, hang on, this is way too boring for me to exist in all the time. So I ended up doing like a total redecoration, kind of renovation in my apartment, and it became bright. It became colorful.
Did you paint, or did you hang things on the wall? How did you go about it?
I hung a lot of art.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Some that I had already had and that had been sort of leaning against a wall for a long time. And then some that I, frankly, because of the good pandemic unemployment checks that I was getting, I was able to like invest in some of my favorite artist friends and buy some of their work and then redecorate my home with it.
So you became a patron of
I
sorts.
became a patron with that Uncle Sam unemployment money.
Kira Medici is your full name.
This is the goal. It's really
actually is Kira Kull your full name, or is there a middle name, or is Kira short for something? I never quite figured that out.
I have two middle names.
Hmm.
Yes, Kira Kull. I mean, packs a punch.
It does.
We love it. Appreciate my parents for it. My full name is Kira Lynn Griffin Kull.
Kira Lynn Griffin Kull.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Full 4.
Mm-hmm. Is Griffin a middle name, or is it another last name?
That's my mother's maiden name.
Oh, wow.
And still her name, actually. She has been married multiple times but never changed it, which I so admire and appreciate.
Yeah.
And the Griffin clan is like very big. My mom's family, my life. So
yeah, which I mean, are they Welsh?
Yeah, actually,
Yeah.
Welsh, probably some Irish, like you know, generally of the region. But yes, it is a Welsh spelling, Griffin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As opposed to the Y.
As opposed to a Y, as opposed to an O, Griffon. As opposed to an E, Griffin. There's a whole there's whole Welsh stories about the different types of griffins, and it seems to be that based on the spelling of their name, they have different personality traits. And so the Griffins, this is at least what my mom always says, that the Griffins are the nice ones.
The Griffins are the nice ones.
There's
also people with the first name Griffin.
Yes.
I know a couple myself.
Are they nice?
They are nice.
Okay.
They are nice. Yes.
So it tracks.
It does. It does. Yeah, I find generalizations on names can be actually quite fun.
Yeah. It's kind of like an astrology thing where you can play with it and like it's entertaining, and sometimes it's really on point and you're like, whoa, but then
names are a whole thing too, because you encounter people all the time where it's like, oh, I would never have a child named, I've never named my kid Nicholas. It's like,
what do you have against Nicholas?
Well, I don't have it, but I'm saying, some people, like, that's an example of some people who actually have a very strong opinions on names and, whether they want it, because it's either a phonetic thing or it's like a cultural thing or like...
There are certain names that I'm not into, but I would say that it's mostly because of like personal experience with someone of that name.
Exactly. You're disinclined because someone ruins the name for you.
Yeah.
Like if you have a bad experience with a Dwight, you're less inclined to name your child Dwight.
Certainly not. I don't think, regardless of knowing, first of all, I've never known anyone actually named Dwight, and regardless, I don't think I would ever name it a child Dwight.
Well, was one of my favorite fun facts is Ike is a nickname for Dwight.
What?
Yeah. Like
how?
Dwight Eisenhower was colloquially known as Ike. No idea how or why.
So strange.
Yes.
The ways that our language and names, but language generally evolves in that way.
Mm-hmm.
That it becomes even like Richard and Dick, as the nickname is what I'm thinking about, and that's something that has been interesting me more recently is etymology and looking at how our language just changes constantly. And then, I kind of know you through a classical theater background a little bit. And when we look back at these words being used in more ancient literary sources, we don't even actually know what the full significance of a word that they're using, how they're using it. Yeah. It's probably very different from what we have now.
Yes, exactly. You need a whole lexicon. And then, of course, there are names, and as of etymology and language as well, there's a whole prism of different names that translate into different languages. For example, my brother is Alexander, which translates into every language because Alexander the Great, many cultures have a name for Alexander the Great. In Persian, it's Iskandar, or Alexandre, or, Alejandro. Like that, my name, Arsalan, it doesn't change. You just say it with a different accent each time. But and so it's interesting that some names are malleable in that way, and they are different cultures have a variation on it, and then there's some names that are just their own thing.
What they are.
And I wonder, is Kira what is there an ethnic or national etymology behind that?
Yeah, there's many things behind Kira, which is really fun. And I think in high school, I had like assignment to look into my name, and this was when I discovered, there's a world of contradictions within my name and within who I am too, perhaps. Which is partially like my parents choosing that a little bit intentionally. So we do have the sort of Gaelic Celtic background, which traditionally has different spelling than I use. But from that root, it's the Dark Lady is Kira, and this sort of goddess of the night, of the moon. But then actually, one of the other sources that my parents were interested in was Kairos, who's a sun god of Persian origins. Mm-hmm. So then you have this dark feminine energy and this light masculine energy.
Wow.
All in my name. And then there's various other things like Kira in Japanese is light. Kira means sparkling.
Wow.
My mom loves that one. And then one time I was traveling in Australia, and I was at this, the Parliament of the World's Religions, which was this incredible summit, basically, of world spiritual leaders, cultural leaders. And I was very interested in just bopping around and having different conversations with different people. And there was this guy, this Aboriginal man, who was selling beautiful art and artifacts around. And I ended up having like a couple conversations just in the courtyard, like between sessions of other things. Huh. And it's one of the things that stuck with me most. And eventually, we exchanged names, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, Kira, did you know in my language means the sky?"
Wow.
And I was just absolutely floored by that. So those are only the ones that I know. There's probably more things that we don't know, encompassing a lot in my little first name.
Yes. Wow. Well, tell me more about this summit. Well, say the name and what city was it in?
So this was in Melbourne, Australia.
Melbourne?
Melbourne, yeah. Melbourne, not Melbourne.
No.
No. And this was the Parliament of the World's Religions, which I think the first one was in, I don't know, maybe the 50s. And it happens every 5 years, I believe, in a different city across the globe. And
the city changes.
Yes, the city changes. And with that, kind of the focus shifts based on the country that's hosting. So there was, because it was in Australia, there was a big focus on Aboriginal and Indigenous tradition and spirituality, which was phenomenal to have. And people from all over the world come to attend, and there were various big sessions with keynote speakers and events and performances. And then there were also a ton of smaller breakout classes or workshops or presentations that you could go to that were either focusing on a specific religion or spiritual path, kind of sharing what they're about. And
wow.
Yeah. And then also there were things like climate justice and, discussing the intersection of racial awareness and racial bias and climate justice together, like Indigenous rights and how that impacts the political sphere of a country. Yeah, this was a hugely formative event that I got to go to in high school through my Catholic high school, which was pretty funny when I think about that. Yeah. But it was very.
How do you organize a breakfast for such a group?
Oh my God, this is a great question. I guess
unleavened bread and
very careful, many options.
Blueberries.
That's it. Maybe an orange juice.
Yeah, the least controversial breakfast, the widest common denominators.
Not a continental breakfast, but a non-controversial breakfast.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah, there we
exactly. Exactly. No, or just some cocoa pebbles.
Yes.
Cocoa pebbles for everybody.
The universal.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did you come across it? You said in high school.
Yeah.
So, and how long is the summit? Weeks or a day or two?
No, I think it was like a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe like a week and a half.
Wow.
Yeah, and
who runs it? Like, what is the centralized body?
It's a great question. I think it's like a combination of group that's put together by the hosting nation.
Huh.
And then also there's what I assume is like a nonprofit kind of organizational body for the parliament
Nonprofit, no pun
itself.
intended.
Yeah. Oh, plenty of profits, but nonprofit though.
Right. Wow. And such a formative experience in high school. How many of these have you gone to then? Have you gone every 5 years since then?
No. I just went to the one. Yeah, I mean, it was a huge endeavor, and I think my high school decided to go. Pretty liberal Catholic, Northern California high school.
Yes. Where exactly?
In San Anselmo, Marin County. So just like 30 minutes north of San Francisco. And we had a handful of sisters, a handful of nuns who were on and around campus, but weren't our teachers necessarily. But there was like a sister who ran the library and a couple others, who were in a sort of advisory position. And we had these loose, my mom called it Catholic light masses.
L-I-T-E.
Yeah, you get it. Catholic light masses, every like a couple times a year. And so they decided they wanted to go to this parliament and put together the team of faculty and a couple sisters, and then they held interviews for the student body to like bring a couple of us, and it was just 3 of us ended up going, and I was sort of the wild card spiritual diversity candidate who got to go because the other 2 were Catholic and I'm not, and was not raised in that way.
Had you always been curious or studious on spirituality and religions in high school? Because I know that that's a big focus on what you do now in your work and in getting a degray in was it
mythological studies?
Mythological studies.
Yeah.
So this is so even going back to high school, was there before then as well your fascination with this subject?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I grew up in a very multi-faith, very hippie spiritual setting, and just inherently was singing and dancing and appreciating different cultures and traditions growing up. And so I then went through this phase, I think just before going to the Parliament of the World's Religions, I feel like I have to say the whole name, where I became very embarrassed about this sort of hippie, unconventional spirituality as a broad umbrella term, non-traditional upbringing that I'd had, and was way too cool for school, and was just like, I'm not interested in this. And then at some point, right around that time, I started realizing, hey, it's actually kind of cool to have like world perspectives from different people in different places and different mindsets about how to perceive and understand the world. And I think, this going to that conference was actually a turning point where I recognized maybe I do want to dive back into this a little bit more, and laid the groundwork certainly for what I'm doing today. Wow.
But in between then, you studied acting.
Yes.
So did you see that as an extension of your studies, or as a departure from it, or How did that experience fold into your previous understanding of, and what do you want us to do in the world?
Probably both and neither, because I just loved theater. I just loved to act. And I never thought that I would do it, really. I just was decent enough at it to get into a good school and loved it and loved New York. And so I was like, let's go and let's play and find out.
Yeah.
And then later, I started learning about, theater's origins are actually in ritual, which is religious, which is spiritual. And there is this sort of experience of tapping into divinity that I think happens inherently in storytelling, and especially in like a live performance setting. But I wasn't thinking about that at the time. Now I kind of have the ability to look back and recognize those things as being connected. But in the time, no, I was just like, this is cool stuff that I'm doing that's interesting and exciting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was your experience and thought on the program? Because we do share that we overlapped at NYU Tisch Acting School.
Yes.
And remind me what studios you were in.
So I was started in Stella Adler, which was it was the only one that I'd actually heard of before going to the school. And I'd been told that it was more traditional and one of the best. And so I was very excited when I found out I was in that one. And I had a background already in doing quite a bit of Shakespeare in high school, so that was also good for me. And then I dabbled around. I did a semester at RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, doing Shakespeare Intensive. And then I came back to Adler for a semester, and then I did the Florence Commedia dell'arte program.
I did that too.
Yeah. I think maybe you did it before me, actually.
Yes. I did it between freshman and sophomore year that summer.
Yeah. I absolutely loved and adored doing that.
Yeah.
I love, playing with masks, and obviously getting to be in Firenze's a dream.
Yeah. And on that campus, the Via La Pietra campus, and performing outdoors. You've in a city like Florence, it does connect all the things you were talking about the old, earthy traditions and practices of theater, literally street performance, wearing, where you're wearing masks that are, non-human, but always are connected to this human essence, right? It's exaggerated humanity. But if you look just coldly at a Commedia dell'arte show, they look like creatures.
Yes.
They're like the Zani with the long hook nose is a trickster, almost demonic character. Yeah. That's something. It's like the actual shapes, similar to like kabuki, or no mask theater in Japan.
Yes. Well, and this is archetype, essentially, what we're talking about.
Yes.
And one of the classes, so the program that I'm in now, mythological studies with a strong lens of depth psychology and Carl Jung and his work. And so we were just talking about archetypes in my last weekend of classes. And I actually spoke about Commedia dell'arte and exactly what you're saying, that it's this, at the same time, enormously, almost grotesquely human experience, which becomes so grotesquely human that it is non-human.
Yes.
And and that's archetype. And so when we engage with whether, it's a symbol or an idea or a character that embodies an archetype, let's say the trickster archetype or the fool archetype. Arlecchino is the classic fool, who we love and adore and is genuinely good-hearted, but just can't help but falling over his own feet constantly. And that's what makes him lovable, because in a way, and I think this is true of most archetype, if we are willing to dig within ourselves, we can relate to all of them in some more than others, but certainly we all have experienced being a fool, and slipping on a banana peel and digging ourselves into a hole that makes whatever's happening worse.
And what I love about Arlecchino as well is a lot of the times his motivations are just so primal, like he's just hungry.
Yeah.
And so he just eats And then in the eating, he's, upset somebody. Like or he's horny, or he's, it's little tiny like vices that are like,
that are inherently just human, and we all experience them, and he just doesn't seem to care about the consequences, and he just follows those impulses fully.
Yes, and he's a yes man.
Yeah.
He's like he's a pleaser, like servant of two masters is a great text to sort of dig into being a yes person or being a pleaser, right? Yeah, that's sort of why Arlecchino is and by the way, James Corden's debut as in One Man, Two Governors, which was a full transposition of A Servant of Two Masters, was I think one of the coolest, like an English style update on that text.
Yeah.
And James Corden did an amazing job playing Arlecchino before he was even the Late Show host.
Wow. I don't think I got to see that.
So good. One Man, Two Governors.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
He was magnificent. I think that's probably the best work he's ever done.
Amazing.
Like I haven't seen him do anything that was as impressive or just like, fully like theatrical and cool as what he did in that show. So that's something to keep up with. So expanding further, to connecting the line between theater and ritual and spirituality.
Yes.
And of course, someone who was able to, I think, connect a lot of these, we talk about Shakespeare, someone who had a strong understanding of myth and the superhuman and, but also connecting it to a lot we're talking about of like the tradition and practice of theater, in this case, Elizabethan theater.
Yeah.
Tell me about, first off, your fascination and your experience performing Shakespeare, because clearly it's something that
I love to do.
You love to do. So using that, if we can, as like a vessel to talk about, the larger stuff.
Okay. Well, there's so much variety in Shakespeare, which is just to start with like a huge broad stroke. That's something that I really appreciate, and that I think is important when we start to talk about theater as ritual, that in some way, I mean, there's huge amounts of theory and intellectual conversation and practice about like why ritual and why is it theatrical, and I'm in the process of forming what I really believe about it. But one thing that I've been noticing is that typically it's representing some aspect of reality, some aspect of life that's being a little bit exaggerated or very exaggerated and placed in this space of the sacred. Something that is out of the realm of day-to-day drinking tea and chatting with a friend. Mm-hmm. And in that heightened space, that spiritual space, the performance of something that might otherwise be mundane becomes magical, becomes spiritual, becomes ritual. And so Shakespeare is great because you have these huge, arching, vast stories that are all-encompassing of the human experience, that even in the pure comedies, there's also heartbreak and loss and devastation. And similarly, in the tragedies, you have that balancing factor of a fool. So like I just saw a production of King Lear, and the fool, there's literally a fool in that play who it plays a pivotal role in the story and also provides some much needed sort of comedic relief.
Yeah. And
having that balance is one of the beautiful things that Shakespeare does really, really well. And so the first Shakespeare play I ever did was Twelfth Night. And I was a freshman in high school, and I played Sir Toby Belch, as one does, which is just like, for anyone who's not familiar, a ridiculously raucous, absurd role that's just like being kind of a mean, but teasing drunk who is just trying to party the whole time, really. Like, he's just trying to party and have a good time. And then there's various pranks that he sort of gets involved in that make it harder for him to remain in the fun zone. And also, various buzzkills come along and that he has to sort of deal with. And, it was in this production, my high school production of 12th Night, we were set in the 60s, and I came stumbling on stage with these giant pleather boots that had been packed full of, mini alcohol bottles that I was just, like, pulling out the whole time throughout the whole scene and drinking, and, like, running around. And it was just so much fun because I'm not a large, drunk, boisterous man. I'm not. But in that realm, I get to become that, which tells me something about what that experience is like for a person who embodies that reality. And also, it informs my perception then of being able to relate to people who live some of that archetype in my life and who I may encounter. Then, maybe at another point in my existence, I would come across a boisterous drunk man and just be like, oh my God, F this guy and, try and whatever, just get out of the space or get him kicked out of the bar or whatever's happening. But from playing that role, I have kind of the ability to think, okay, well, what's really going on underneath all of this that's driving the drunkenness, that's driving the meanness, and access that empathy. And I think that's really, again, broad strokes, but ritual is about accessing a universal connection in any given community to a larger story that might be a creation myth, that might have to do with nature and the elements and honoring these bigger cycles, and might be as simple as having some compassion for the leaders of a community having to make hard decisions.
Wow.
Hey everyone, it's Arsalon. I hope you're enjoying this episode. If you are, remember to subscribe and hit the bell notification so that you can get notified every time there's a new video on the channel. Enjoy part 2.
I completely identify with what you were just talking about with regards to embodying a different character on stage, because I always find that theater also foundationally is the practice of empathy. It's taking on another character, and if you're really thoughtful about it, you're paying attention not just to like how they sound or how they walk, but really you permeating deeper into understanding their worldview. Mm-hmm. And I think that is an increasingly rare experience to have right now, because theater is, of course, the most immediate human dialogue art form that we have. But I find, and I lament a lot of the time, that people kind of forget that a lot of the purpose of theater is to make these primal human connections. You can, in this abstract space of theater, find your commonality with a wizard or a dragon or a drunk man.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, in terms of how the future of theater and the future of the arts as tools for social change, really, because I think right now it's rather obvious that we're living in a very divided time, a very tribalized time. People's identities are becoming more atomized, but they're also finding groups and finding identities within groups, and it's a very, I think, abstracted time of people exploring who they are. And so a lot of attention is being put on that. And I wonder, when is how do we then continue folding that into this larger empathetic discussion of finding commonality?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you have the answer, but do you find that the arts are still a strong and a good way to do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Partially just because I think as humans, we need creative outlet.
Mm-hmm.
We desperately need creative outlet, whether it's theater or painting or music or something else. That ability to express oneself fully and authentically within a container that is safe enough to do so is already a very necessary part of individual healing. I'm a big believer in art therapy of all kinds. And then, in terms of establishing empathy, especially with someone or a character who has a very different life experience and worldview than us, I don't know of any more effective tool than doing like a theater class. And so this was actually my main work before the pandemic, was that I was teaching in jails, acting and playwriting classes. And, you have quite a diverse group of experience in those classes. And we just got to all play together. And that's a very equalizing thing, where in this container, in this space of time where you're improvising with just 2 to 3 lines of dialogue, you're all the same. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. We're all just humans, and we're in bodies, and we're making sounds with our mouths. And sometimes they make us laugh, and then there would be like somebody would make a different choice, and it would be very tender. And that was a big sort of key focus of those classes, which comes from Stella Adler, is the idea that your talent is in your choice. And I think that that's true for us as humans, too, not just as actors.
I like that phrase a lot.
Yeah, your talent is in your choice, because we all have the ability to choose what we do with our lives. Why not have it be meaningful and impactful and fun and ultimately real?
Yeah. And I think taking it one step further, I think people are lately empowered to do so, not just in the controlled abstract space of the theater, but all the world's a stage, right?
Yes.
Seeing their, and I think of the RuPaul quote, right, where RuPaul says, "You're born naked, and everything else is drag."
Yes.
So RuPaul, of course, abstracting and deconstructing presentation of colors, as we talked about earlier, or fabrics, or clothes, or
fashion is a great one.
Yes, and people are finding, I think, opportunity, and also empowerment, and also creativity, and also blurring the form or advancing the form of, or intersecting the forms of how you traditionally present yourself, whether it's your gender or whether it's your your worldview, whether it's through tattoos or piercings. The tools are kind of more in everyday world, I think.
Yes.
Society.
Definitely.
Today.
Talking about all the world's a stage, social media,
yes,
is such obviously a platform for connecting with each other across the globe, but also it's a huge tool for self-expression that's free and accessible and available to all.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go and have multiple accounts and present different characters and explore different aspects of your persona, which is essentially drag, by the way, is just taking an aspect of yourself, or a couple aspects, and blowing it up into a whole character, who probably dresses differently and likely has different makeup and hair and maybe even vocal style and everything. And that freedom to simply express and play within how we present and how we are is I think, such a key part of why I personally feel very grateful to be alive in this time, and excited at the possibility of what people have to share.
Yeah.
there's infinite things that
Trading
people
notes.
are coming up with. Yeah, exactly.
It's like, what have you been up to? Whoa!
Whoa! Oh my god! Well, exactly. I mean,
Where'd you get that?
Yes, precisely. It's like, oh my god! Well, this inspired me from that. This movie in the 40s, and now I am contextualizing it in 2022, and what does that mean for this? And it's just so fun to play with. And then, like, we were talking about tragedy and comedy and the duality of both existing always, that in that fun and play and exploration, there ends up coming this natural sort of empathetic response of, usually, at least I think, when we see someone doing something vulnerable, like putting themselves on stage in front of an audience, that's a pretty vulnerable thing to do. And being authentic or being bold or being wild or unexpected, that creates a bit of empathy, one would hope, from an audience member to say, like, wow, even if it's just, oh my gosh, that was so fun. Oh my gosh, that was so entertaining. Now, somebody who maybe had never experienced, we're running with the drag metaphor, before, is like, okay, that was cool. And maybe I could even do that. Yeah.
And I wonder if, we talked about the power of media and the power of culture, I think, in influencing all of these things. And, because I like to call myself a culture war buff. The same way that people have old dads are like cigar smoking, like Civil War buffs. Like, that's me sort of like, assessing the culture war right now. And in rather stark terms, there is and a lot of the political left is, in terms of Hollywood culture, music culture, pop culture, seems to be in direct opposition to, again, very basic, crude terms.
Please.
The traditional conservative right. It's a familiar dynamic, but that has permeated really strongly and red hot flames in culture war.
Yes.
Where you have people who are on the cultural right, who are seeing the roles that movies and pop culture are taking in making active steps to broaden, whether it's progressive political agenda or abstracting things like gender and sexuality. They see it as threatening or destructive. And so I wonder, because obviously within the cultural left, there seems to be a lot of words that are meant to unify people, right? Like these sort of new terms, like pansexual or intersex and all that. But I wonder, at what point will this division continue in this way? Like, at what point does it become an exercise in persuading the conservative or right side to be open-minded about this? And at what point does it become about separating, political beliefs from identity? That's a lot to kind of throw, out there, because, like you said, we're living in a time where so much is abstracted. And I know that also within queer, intersex, trans communities, a lot of the conversation is about saying this is not a new phenomenon. This is not a new assault on, whatever the conservative.
It's not a fresh cultural take.
It's not a fresh cultural take, but rather a reclaiming or reminder of what has always been.
A return.
So, a return, exactly. And so, I can't even necessarily fabricate a question, but I guess I'll just defer to, if you wouldn't mind sharing your own journey or your own observations on how you've expanded your own footprint and identity, and whether you find that, how you define moving forward for yourself and on behalf of the people that you...
Ooh, asking me to speak on behalf of the people now. Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, no pressure. Great. Yeah, it's a vast, beautiful, big question. So thank you for asking it, and contextualizing it in our current political climate and cultural sphere, which is so complex and vast. Something that I find myself debating a lot is, to what degree do I engage with attempting to persuade, and to what degree do I sort of protect my own peace, and simply by being who I am, that's enough. Janaya Khan, who's an incredible non-binary activist, very involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, they talk about, rather than trying to teach the light, be the light.
Mm-hmm.
And simply that in and of itself is enough, is being a role model, is shifting the culture by allowing oneself to be seen. That shifts the scheme. I mean, especially back to social media, especially when being seen can very easily be on a global stage through Instagram or TikTok. My own experience has been vast and varied. I have always been queer, and formally came out when I was 15 and a half as bisexual, and then lived pretty comfortably in that identity, and am very much of the millennial generation that was kind of before trans rights came to the forefront of the cultural conversation. Certainly before using they, them pronouns was very common, before non-binary was a common idea, more common idea. And so I kind of grew up through really our college time experiencing that shift and broadening my own perceptions. I remember the first person that I met who was using they, them pronouns was in one of my academic college classes. And I too, like, everyone had that moment of being like, oh, this is a different thing, and working and struggling a little bit to like adjust my mentality and my language, update my language around talking about them and speaking with them. And that this thing of it being new is simultaneously true and not true, because as it was for me in that classroom with that particular person, it was new for me in Kira, in my body, in my reality, to meet someone who didn't use he or she pronouns and adjust the way that I thought about them and perceived and communicated with them. And simultaneously, it's not new on the cultural scheme of humanity. We know this from living in current Indigenous communities. There are many from the Hawaiian mahu, which is a third gender, to, other many Native American Indigenous traditions that include 3 to 5 genders or more. And also across more recent, even European history, looking at the way that gender plays a role in like Restoration comedy, even in Shakespeare. Like,
yes,
it was, you didn't have women on stage, which has its levels of misogyny that is a different conversation for another time. But then what that meant was you had young men playing the romantic female love interest, and that was common, and they were adored, and very likely very queer. There's things like this, and then it takes kind of a lot of this digging, I think, to examine what is really going on, because we have so many layers of complexity. And I often try to seek, when looking at my own experience, what is simple. And big thing that came up for me in the pandemic was discovering that I'm intersex. And I didn't know. I didn't know until like the summer of 2020. And partially because I had been essentially on hormone therapy, essentially, since I was 14 by being on birth control. I was on the pill. And that in and of itself is hormone therapy. We don't call it that because it's normalized, because it fuels the narrative of traditional gender roles. And so to talk about the right, one of the things they advocate for is like, oh, you can't have kids being on hormones, or taking hormone blockers because they think that they're trans, and then they transition, then they grow up and suddenly they're, oh no, I actually don't want to be this. This isn't me after all. Well, here I was, a 14-year-old who went to a dermatologist because I had acne and I was embarrassed about it. It was certainly negatively impacting my mental health. And just for that was like, oh, well, these other things aren't working. Let's just put you on hormones via birth control. And that essentially kept me frozen in this ability, in this like presentational conformity of femininity, big air quotes, of womanhood, big air quotes, for 12 years. And then I had just stopped taking it before the pandemic for the first time and encountered first I encountered puberty for a second time, which obviously sucked, but was ultimately profoundly transformative and empowering, because then I learned through a friend who is an intersex activist, and because of their willingness to be seen on a public sphere, I had that access to, oh, maybe this applies to me, and was able to learn more about my identity, which, back to being simple, my body in and of itself simply lives in the in-between, naturally. And that's not something that can be debated. It's not something, that something can be like, well, you're just choosing to be non-binary because it's cool, that's like, but no, this is just actually how I was born, and that's kind of the whole queer like agenda, is just saying, just let me be who I am, naturally, simply.
Wow. Yeah. And I asked you, I think, recently as well. I was wondering if in that discovery, if there was a retroactive clarity that you got in discovering that you were intersex. Was it a matter of that you had at last maybe found the right words to describe, past feelings, or how did it sort of like how did you look back on your previous, experiences with gender and identity? Was it with added vocabulary, or just added, kind of relief?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, it's a good question. Yes. No, but to lay some sort of vocabulary groundwork so that we're on the same page. First, I just want to talk about what it means to be intersex, and also what the distinction, to my awareness, is between sex and gender, because this is very important to the conversation. I think a lot of the time, this happens a lot with rhetoric on the right, but just as much, in liberal and very highly educated circles too, that we confuse sex and gender, and then also sexuality, which is its own separate thing. So being intersex just means that any intersex person physically has sex characteristics, biological sex characteristics, that are not typically easily categorizable in either female or male. And that can present in a lot of different ways. It can be purely hormonal. It can be on the chromosomal level. It can be genitals. It can be secondary sex characteristics, anything in that range. So anything that isn't just 100% checking every box as male or every box as female, anything in between. And then when we talk, so that's sex, right, which is biological and categorized. Really, this came up with the invention of the birth certificate, actually created a huge shift in how we understand that. And so if we can understand that sex is not just one or the other, but actually a scale of difference, and intersex people fall somewhere in the middle of that. And then gender is more about like personal identity. And so again, you have these sort of spectrum of masculine, feminine, male, female, man, woman, and all of the things that come with that around clothing and colors is a great one. You know, that little boys are supposed to love blue and little girls are supposed to love pink, but like in reality that actually has been flipped in the past. And so it's like we just keep making it up. And so to think again of gender as, okay, it's a sliding scale, and non-binary people fall somewhere in between or even outside of the scale entirely. And then sexuality, likewise, a scale. So thinking about things just instantly as more fluid rather than binary is a good place to start. So looking back retroactively for me, once I knew that I was intersex and started to explore more or investigate internally about my gender identity, and which could be called non-binary, I sometimes identify in that realm too. Of course it made sense. I mean, even just looking, we were talking about me playing Sir Toby Belch. I was at an all-girls Catholic high school, and so I have a naturally low voice and enough range to have played a lot of male roles in my 4 years there, and loved it and had a great time doing it, and wasn't thinking about it as exploration of gender. Certainly wasn't thinking about it in terms of drag, which obviously now I'm like, oh yeah, I really loved being in a 3-piece suit in Guys and Dolls. Like, what does that say about me? Like, this is an experience of doing drag.
Right.
And so in terms of gender identity, absolutely, I was just like, oh my God, duh. This, of course, makes sense. And then also biologically, it was very affirming because part of why I had originally gone on that birth control was because I was having super inconsistent periods. And that was like allegedly presenting part of the quote unquote problem of my health in puberty. And there wasn't actually an issue. It wasn't a problem, but it was just affirming to learn like, oh, that inconsistency in my period was just like a natural thing because of my body being non-binary, being intersex.
Wow. And so now today, living in Los Angeles in 2022.
Yes.
How do you feel generally about the people you've continued to meet, whether they're queer or not, about, you know, living in Los Angeles? So to bring us back to now, to the here and now, like how's like school going, like how and
well,
blossoming outside of this transitional period into the more immediate present,
certainly,
or the more recent past. How are things going?
Well, Arsalan, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
Which, by the way, the rest of that quote is amazing.
I mean, maybe another time.
It was like the age of wisdom. It was the age of like, so whatever.
Yeah, I don't know it. but it's true. You know, I feel like we're really in a time of extremes.
Yes.
And I feel simultaneously so fucking grateful to be alive right now, and that I don't have to riot in the streets like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera did, which started the gay rights movement, which led us to have pride, that is the freedom to just literally parade and party and be super gay and like put glitter on and, you know, wave rainbow flags around. I live with so much more freedom than existed even 10 years ago. And yet also it's very scary to be queer right now. It's very easy to forget that we're in sort of a little bubble here in LA, like glancing out at the city, and we are kind of in a liberal, magical, very queer bubble. And a lot of the rest of the country, even, a lot of the rest of California, has a lot of fear of gay people and a lot of hate that unfortunately gets harnessed through things like guns and other forms of violence that we have access to in this day and age that can cause suddenly 49 people to be killed at a gay nightclub in Orlando. And that is a reality, that I live with, that I think every queer person to a degree lives with. Every time we do go out, whether it's to a club or a big party, especially in a public space, it's especially in recent years more in the forefront of my mind. And it is heartbreaking because to have both, to be able to feel and taste and touch and experience the joy of actual freedom that's not with any agenda, that's not about anybody else other than just me being me. And also feel the pain of people making it about them and weaponizing that against queer people. Because, back to what you were saying earlier about the right and how, the degrees of persuasion and how we try to do that. And also empathizing with and understanding the other perspective. I get it. I certainly don't agree with it. I advocate against it and protest against it when I can. But I understand the socialization and the conditioning of colonial, patriarchal, white supremacist, heteronormative culture that tells us if you don't fit into X or Y category, you don't belong. And anything that doesn't belong, anyone who doesn't belong, is a threat.
And I think we even go, I hear all of that. And even going one step further, especially in America, economically and politically, is an increasingly the individual human experience is increasingly being overridden by automation or sterile, or it's becoming a much more sterile thing to live in the world right now as someone who wants to, whether it's even just trying to start getting into like labor rights, even like
For sure.
One of my favorite movies, Network, for example, rails the anchor Howard Beale. He rails about how this is no longer, in 1976 he was saying this. This is not a nation of individuals anymore. It's become so transistorized and sterilized that like we're in this machinery where the things are sort of, I don't know, people see not just, I think, queer and expression as threatening, but they see individualism as increasingly threatening.
Yes.
In America, unless you translate that individualism into a business and you are suddenly an entrepreneur, you are ostracized.
Yeah.
As a single mother, you're ostracized. As a divorced, person, you're still ostracized. So that's the other thing, too.
If you're not capitalizing on your trauma or any sort of otherness, then it's not valid. Yes.
Which is also, by the way, my own personal observation and my own questions of, how you negotiate the sometimes disparity between an individual identity and a group identity.
Yes.
You know, as we talked about, there's myriad new ways of defining how an individual identifies or lives, but less vocabulary in terms of which group you belong to. And so, you know, it's almost another question of two extremes. It's like and it becomes a matter of like, you know, it folds also into like this larger thing about, you know, how you organize and how you mobilize and how you, you know, form alliances, like, you know, LGBTQI, you know, like it's sort of almost like, you know, it's obviously a disrespected, I think, you know,
plus
thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, it does speak to, I think, a maturity that I think needs to happen where that requires remembering the individual as well as the tribe or the group.
Yes. Well, and that's so key, I think, in healthy spiritual community or any kind of community that has like a healthy way of existing that's in appropriate relation to one another, to the land, to maybe a neighboring tribe or community, is about honoring the medicine that we each bring.
Yeah.
Which could be, for some people, just being a clown, you know?
Yeah.
And for someone else, it's the tremendous skill they have with fashion and design or, you know, weaving.
I love what you're saying. And it's why, frankly, I love Lego so much and these little Lego cities. Like the Parisian restaurant over here or Assembly Square over there. In a Lego city, the guys are, the people, not guys, but the people are identified as the florist or the dentist or the photographer. Your identity in the Lego world is your skill set or your profession.
Yes.
Or what you contribute to society. You know? So I also wonder, like, we've also lost because, you know, nobody aspires to be a florist anymore these days. Or speaking broadly, everyone aspires to be an influencer or on YouTube.
Entrepreneur. Yes. Well, and that's okay. I'm going to tie it just with one little thing, which is one of my very favorite non-binary activist, poet, comedian, Alok Menon.
Ah, yes, I know.
Yes, Alok is incredible. And they talk about that, like, queer liberation isn't actually just about queer people. It's for all of us.
Yes.
Because when queer people are allowed to be their full selves, so too is everyone else allowed to be their full selves. And it might not look like changing anything about one's gender identity, but it could be like, you know what? I'm going to go from being a cowboy to a florist. And that's beautiful. If you want to do that, if a cowboy's passionate about flowers, they should be able to pursue that. Right.
Well, there you go. Well, I think that runs our time, but hopefully maybe you'll come back and trade some more notes and observations in the real and the spiritual and the mythic world. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll talk again soon.
Yay.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye, Kira. Thanks.